If you are married, or planning to get married, look at your finger. There is a good chance you are wearing a diamond. It is the ultimate symbol of love. It is rare. It is precious. It is forever. Or at least, that is what you have been told. But what if I told you that the stone on your finger isn't rare at all? What if I told you that for the last 100 years, you haven't been buying a gemstone, you have been buying a marketing campaign? The reason you spent 3 months' salary on a rock is because a single company decided you should. A company that bought governments, crushed competitors, and hired an ad agency to psychologically manipulate the entire world. They didn't just sell diamonds. They invented the concept of the engagement ring to offload their excess inventory. They convinced you that a shiny piece of pressurized carbon was the only way to prove your love. And when the supply of diamonds got too high, they didn't lower the price. They just buried them in a vault in London to make you think they were scarce. You might know them as the cartel, but history knows them as De Beers. For a century, they controlled 90% of the world's diamond supply. They were the most successful monopoly in the history of capitalism. But today, the empire is crumbling. This is the story of the greatest scam ever sold. This is the story of how a shiny rock became the most expensive lie in human history. To understand the lie, you have to go back to a time when diamonds actually were rare. Before 1870, if you wanted a diamond, you had to find one in a riverbed in India or the jungles of Brazil. They were incredibly scarce. Kings wore them. Queens wore them. You didn't. But in 1870, a teenager named Cecil Rhodes arrived in South Africa. He was a sickly British kid who came for the weather. But he found something else. In the fields of Kimberley, men were finding diamonds by the handful. They weren't rare anymore. They were everywhere. The ground was literally sparkling with them. This terrified the diamond merchants in London. They knew a basic rule of economics. If everyone has a diamond, diamonds are worth nothing. If the market was flooded with these South African stones, the price would crash, and diamonds would become as cheap as turquoise or amethyst. Cecil Rhodes understood this. He knew that to save the value of diamonds, he had to stop people from selling them. He didn't just want to own a mine. He wanted to own the supply. He wanted to be the bottleneck. Rhodes was ruthless. He used British money to buy up every small claim in Kimberley. If a miner wouldn't sell, Rhodes squeezed them out. He controlled the water pumps. He controlled the land. By 1888, he had consolidated the chaos into a single entity, De Beers Consolidated Mines. Rhodes owned it all, and because he owned it all, he could do something illegal in a free market. He could fix the price. If demand was low, he closed the mines. If demand was high, he opened the tap just enough to keep the price astronomical. He famously said, if there are only 4 people in the world who want a diamond, there must only be enough diamonds for 2. He created artificial scarcity. The diamonds weren't rare. They were just locked away. But Rhodes had a problem. He could control the supply, but he couldn't control the demand. And in the 1930s, demand hit zero. The Great Depression destroyed the global economy. People were struggling to buy bread. They certainly weren't buying useless rocks. Diamond prices collapsed. De Beers was sitting on tons of inventory that nobody wanted. In Europe, diamonds were seen as an aristocratic relic. In America, they were seen as a waste of money. De Beers needed a miracle. They needed to convince a generation of poor Americans to buy a luxury product they didn't need. So, in 1938, Harry Oppenheimer, the son of the De Beers chairman, traveled to New York City. He met with an advertising agency called NWA. This meeting changed the world. It was the moment the diamond stopped being a gemstone and became a psychological weapon. The ad men at NWA were brutally honest. They told De Beers, "We cannot sell diamonds as a commodity. We have to sell them as an emotion." They realized that they couldn't just sell the stone, they had to sell the idea of the stone. They launched a campaign to infiltrate American culture. They didn't just buy billboards. They went to Hollywood. They gave free diamonds to movie stars and insisted they wear them in their films. They paid newspapers to run stories about celebrity proposals involving massive diamond rings. They even went into high schools to lecture teenage girls on the tradition of the diamond engagement ring. There was no tradition. Before 1940, engagement rings rarely had diamonds. They were simple gold bands, or they use sapphires or rubies. De Beers invented the tradition from scratch. But they needed a slogan. Something that would stop people from ever reselling their diamonds. You see, a diamond is a terrible investment. If you try to sell your ring back to a jeweler the day after you bought it, you will get 30% of what you paid. Diamonds have no resale value because they aren't actually rare. If people started selling their old rings, the market would flood and the price would crash. De Beers needed to convince you that a diamond is something you keep forever. You never sell it. You pass it down. It leaves the market permanently. In 1947, a female copywriter named Frances Geraghty was working late at the agency. She was tired. She scribbled a line on a piece of paper before going to bed. 4 words. A diamond is forever. It was perfect. It told you that the stone was eternal, just like your love. But subliminally, it told you, do not resell this. Then came the masterstroke. In the 1980s, De Beers wanted to sell bigger, more expensive stones. So they invented a rule. You know the one. The 2-month salaries rule. This wasn't an ancient custom. It wasn't etiquette. It was a marketing poster. The original ads literally showed a man asking, "How can you make 2 months' salary last forever?" Later, in Japan, they changed it to 3 months' salary because they realized the Japanese market would pay more. It worked. In 1939, fewer than 10% of American brides received a diamond engagement ring. By 1990, it was 80%. De Beers had successfully hacked the human brain. They tax a man's love for his wife at the rate of 3 months' income, and we all just accepted it. But marketing was only half the battle. To keep the price high, De Beers had to maintain the monopoly. And that meant acting like a mafia. For most of the 20th century, De Beers operated a system called the syndicate. If you were a diamond mine anywhere in the world, in Russia, in Africa, in South America, you had 2 choices. You could sell your diamonds to De Beers, or De Beers would destroy you. If a mine tried to sell independently, De Beers would flood that specific market with similar diamonds from their stockpile. They would drop the price until the independent mine went bankrupt, then they would buy the mine for pennies. De Beers controlled the flow of diamonds through a building in London called the CSO, the Central Selling Organization. 10 times a year, they invited 125 handpicked diamond merchants to London. These events were called sites. The merchants, known as site holders, would enter a room. They would be handed a small yellow box containing rough diamonds. The price was written on the box. There was no negotiation. You didn't get to pick the stones. You didn't get to haggle. It was take it or leave it. If you refused the box, you were blacklisted. You would never buy a diamond from De Beers again. And since De Beers owned 90% of the market, that meant you were out of business. This system allowed De Beers to control the world price of diamonds with godlike precision. If the economy was hot, they raised prices. If the economy was cold, they reduced the supply in the boxes. The price of diamonds didn't fluctuate like gold or oil. It only went up. Because De Beers said so. But in the 1990s, the cracks began to show. The empire was getting too big to control. The first blow came from the Soviet Union. In the 1950s, Russia discovered massive diamond deposits in Siberia. At first, De Beers just bought them all. They signed a secret deal to buy every single rough diamond Russia produced, just to keep them off the market. They shoved them into the vault. But then, Australia found diamonds. The Argyle mine. It was huge. It produced millions of low-quality, pink and brown diamonds. De Beers tried to control them, but the Australians were stubborn. In 1996, the Argyle mine broke away from the cartel. They started selling their own diamonds directly to polishers in India. Suddenly, the monopoly was broken. For the first time in history, there was a free market for diamonds. Then came Canada. Geologists found massive diamond pipes under the frozen lakes of the Northwest Territories. De Beers rushed in to buy the land, but the Canadian government blocked them. They forced the mines to remain independent. De Beers was bleeding. They were losing market share every year. They went from controlling 90% of the market to 60%, then 40%. They couldn't fix the price anymore because they didn't own the supply. And then, the moral bill came due. For decades, De Beers had operated in the shadows of Africa. They didn't care who they bought from, as long as they controlled the supply. In the 1990s, civil wars erupted in Sierra Leone and Angola. Rebel groups seized the diamond mines. These rebels used forced labor to dig up stones. They sold the diamonds to buy AK-47s and machetes. They chopped off the hands of civilians who didn't work fast enough. These were the blood diamonds. And where did these diamonds go? Many of them ended up in the De Beers supply chain. De Beers bought diamonds from the open market to maintain their price fix, and in doing so, they inadvertently funded warlords and massacres. When the truth came out, it was a PR nightmare. The shiny, innocent symbol of love was suddenly stained with blood. De Beers tried to pivot. They supported the Kimberley process to certify diamonds as conflict-free. But the damage was done. The illusion of purity was shattered. The final nail in the coffin was the United States government. For decades, De Beers was effectively banned from operating in the US because their business model violated American antitrust laws. They were a textbook illegal monopoly. In the early 2000s, De Beers finally decided to settle the lawsuits. They paid $295 million to settle price-fixing charges. They officially liquidated their stockpile. They admitted defeat. They announced that they were no longer the custodian of the market. They were just a diamond company. Today, De Beers is a shadow of its former self. Their market share has plummeted to under 30%. They are currently owned by Anglo American, a mining giant that is actively trying to sell them off. The company that once told kings what to do is now struggling to turn a profit. And now, they face a new threat. One that Cecil Rhodes couldn't have imagined. Science. We can now create diamonds in a lab. These aren't fakes. They aren't cubic zirconia. They are chemically, physically, and optically identical to mined diamonds. Even an expert jeweler cannot tell the difference without a machine. A lab-grown diamond costs 80% less than a mined diamond. And it is perfect. No flaws. No blood. No warlords. De Beers tried to fight it. They ran ads saying real is rare. They tried to convince you that a diamond grown in the earth has mystique. But the younger generation isn't buying it. Why spend $10,000 on a rock when you can get the exact same rock for $1,000? The De Beers monopoly relied on two lies: scarcity and sentiment. Lab-grown diamonds killed the scarcity. And the history of blood diamonds killed the sentiment. So, why did I tell you this? I told you this because the De Beers story is the ultimate lesson in perceived value. We live in a world where price is often disconnected from reality. We assume that if something is expensive, it must be valuable. We assume that if everyone does something, it must be a tradition. But the diamond engagement ring isn't a tradition. It's a receipts mechanism for a cartel that is no longer in charge. The stone on your finger is beautiful. It sparkles. It catches the light. But it isn't an investment. It isn't rare. And it certainly isn't forever. If you bought a diamond because you love it, that's great. Enjoy it. But if you bought it because you thought you had to, if you bought it because you thought it was an ancient custom, then you didn't buy a diamond. You bought a billboard. The next time you see a diamond commercial, remember Cecil Rhodes. Remember the stockpile in London. And remember that the most valuable thing in that relationship isn't the rock. It's the person standing next to you. And unlike a diamond, their love actually is rare. De Beers spent billions to convince you that a diamond is forever. But looking at their crumbling empire today, it turns out that nothing is forever. Not even a monopoly.